Thank you there, Javier there, from the European Space Agency for the opening keynote address there. We're very thankful for his delivery on the satellite composition in the 5G and 6G spectrum. So I just want to swiftly move this on to our next session. Feel free to, for those at the back, feel free to sit at the front of the conference room as well, where there's plenty of seating there. We've got our next session is quite a cozy fireside keynote chat about the delivery of the Metaverse and the digital infrastructure implications in the rollout of this. We've got a great session coming up, which is entitled The Metaverse, the Connectivity Conundrum, which is the first part of a two-parted session. Before I do, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors. Without their support of this event is absolutely grateful indeed. So just to bring out the next speakers for this one are Jezebel Gilmore, the Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Packet Fabric, Mark Cooper, the VP of Edge Strategy at Atlas Edge, who is in replace of Lee Heffrington, who's had to, unfortunately, won't be there for this session, and moderated by Carl Roberts, the partner of Hadara Consulting, who'll be chairing this one. So I'd like to invite those three speakers onto the middle stage seats for this one. Give them all a round of applause as well. Thank you.
We all mic'd out? Yes, that sounds about right.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi.
Good. Well, we've been to outer space. That was really quite impressive to look at the technology that's being planned out there. Today we're going to talk about something equally vast and limitless called the Metaverse. Now, the Metaverse, I think if we asked each person in the room here for a definition, you'd have a different one. And every definition would not be altogether right and not altogether wrong. So, you know what? We're not going to define the Metaverse here, right? It's not a brand new thing. Is it Web 4.0? Probably a bit of all of that. But before we get into it, panel's been introduced, but maybe let's ask them to speak a little bit more about their companies. Jezebel?
Oh, hi, I'm Jezebel Gilmore. I work for Packet Fabric, and Packet Fabric is a SDN company, so software-defined network. We offer fully automated network services in North America and EMEA and APAC.
Okay, Mark?
Hi, Mark Cooper, VP Edge Strategy for Atlas Edge. We are Europe's leading edge data center platform. So we're currently in 13 countries and plans to expand a lot deeper. And we're very, very focused on enabling edge technologies. So for us, the Metaverse is an incredibly interesting topic.
And I'm delighted to have these two great friends on stage here today, because what they got to say is very germane to all of you. But before we get into it, let's have a few gee-whiz facts about the Metaverse. I always find this fascinating. So, corporations, VCs, and PEs have already invested, and this is up the first half of this year, $120 billion in Metaverse-related projects. That's over double everything that went down in 2021. Consumers and enterprises suggest that by 2030, the Metaverse will generate anywhere between $8 and $13 trillion worth of business. Kind of astronomical numbers here. Meta has almost 3 billion users in virtual platforms. We've got already over 100 virtual worlds out there. Interestingly enough, revenues that are attributed to Metaverse, like 3/4 of it is gaming, which is interesting. So that's a lot of Gen Z people involved in that. And even even governments are getting involved. So Dubai, where I hail from, they have a government office dedicated to Metaverse strategy, and they believe that by 2030, 42,000 jobs will be Metaverse related, and that'll be worth about $4 billion just to the Dubai economy. And finally, in Korea, City of Seoul plans to spend $32 million on the Metaverse ecosystem. Now, this is all great, and people talk about AR, AI, VR, and it's all fantastic. But here's the thing, right? None of this works without the infrastructure that we're all building. From a connectivity standpoint, which is why it's key to have Jezebel here, and from an edge compute standpoint, why it's important to have Mark here. So with everybody spending really bucket loads of money on software, on equipment, on everything, the areas that everybody recognizes to be important to underpin all of this are network infrastructure and compute capability, particularly at the edge, but it kind of stops there. So as my intro question, how is this going to impact connectivity and edge design and implementation? Because whatever we have today, we know for sure it's not going to be good enough. So Jezebel, you want to have a first shot at that?
Well, you know, Metaverse won't exist without the development and further expansion of edge solutions. And you probably know the most relevant and use case that we have today is when you're playing video games, and if you have latency, it causes motion sickness, right? So, well, I have a 10-year-old. I don't want him to be throwing up in my living room using the Oculus. So, well, you probably don't either. But who is going to develop the physical infrastructure? Because the infrastructure itself requires upgrade in the last mile. And we talk about edge all the time. Edge requires investment. That means IP breakout in a location near where the eyeballs are. And the impact of that investment will be not just to the metaverse itself, but to real estate and to many other aspects of economy. And who is going to be responsible to make that investment, and who's going to be reaping the reward for that investment is yet to be seen.
Mark?
Yeah, I think if you look at what we've done as an industry, whether it's as a networking industry or as a data center industry, we've got very good at scaling up and centralizing. If the metaverse, in whatever form it takes, has any chance of success, we need to reverse that trend. So Jezebel touched on it. We need to change the way that we do interconnection. You can't have everything centralized into the flap cities. You're going to have to decentralize the infrastructure. You're going to have to do traffic handoff much deeper within the countries, which requires investment, which requires completely changing the architecture. And it's the whole chain. So you have the last mile, whether it's fixed or mobile. You have the data center. You have the edge compute piece. You have the long haul, the middle haul, the large compute locations. Everything needs to line up to be able to deliver that ubiquitous experience. So it's going to require a massive change in the way we've architected both the compute infrastructure but also the networks. And I think the question is, who's going to pay for that? Because someone needs to figure out how to monetize this, and we're not there yet.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. And then, yeah, one of the things that came out of what you just said there, every step of the way, there needs to be seamless operability. So who should be responsible for orchestrating that? Is it going to be a software company? Is it going to be a Meta? Don't think so. Is it going to be a telecom operator? Maybe, probably. But what does that entail? Because you need to have every piece fully aligned, and not just in one country, not in just one region, but across the planet. And this is where cooperation across not just telecom operators, but also software companies, the platform providers, the people with all the, you imagine what kind of back office systems you need for this. It's, it's diabolical when you think about it. And I guess, we just saw from the gentleman from the ESA, they've got a very well-defined plan, including investments. They've got a roadmap. I don't know, I'm not aware that the Metaverse has any of that today, right?
In pockets it does.
Yeah, in pockets. So what do you think needs to happen with all the kind of interested parties here? What do we need to do to bring everybody together to have those kind of conversations? Because it's definitely not happening today. So in an ideal world, how would you go about bringing these parties together?
Well, so first of all, I was going to say the internet is self-regulating. There's no, internet regulation agency. So I don't see why that there should be one for the metaverse. Mm-hmm. And I think that the collaboration between the different participants can be self-regulating, and but in our industry, the money speaks, right? There's incredible opportunities that we're seeing in support and building of what is called the metaverse. And so I know that there are people, you talked about how much money had been invested during the second half of this year towards the applications and content creation of metaverse. Well, the infrastructure requires money too, requires investment, and there's incredible opportunity for that investment to happen right now.
Yeah, I think there needs to be investment across the spectrum, whether it's the compute platforms, whether it's the data center platforms, whether it's the network service providers. But for me, the key thing that's going to drive the success and that will drive investment is when we figure out, and I'll use the word again, how we make it ubiquitous, so that if you're a BT user at home and your friend's on Vodafone, you want to have the same experience between them. So what we can't do is go down this route that's been fallen into before, which is building these walled gardens. We need to make sure that it's open, and that you don't end up with a situation where someone's trying to monetize it, but they've monetized it only for their users. We need to find a way to make it open for everyone.
And in terms of, we've mentioned, who's going to pay for this and who's going to get a return on this. We've gone through a period of, goodness knows, 5-10 years where we've had the whole conversation about hyperscalers who have taken advantage of telecoms infrastructures, probably not paying as much as telecoms operators would want them to pay for delivering those services and for making those investments. And now, years later, we're starting to see the kind of other end of that loop where operators are getting together. There's a recent initiative in Europe here where operators are saying, well, look, we're a key part of generating this wealth and we need to get some revenue share there. So the question I'd have is, instead of going through that loop again, should we be having those conversations up front saying, yes, you will invest in software, you'll invest in platforms, but how about you also sharing in investing in the underlying infrastructure, which is in itself very complex. People take it for granted. But what everybody in this room and this conference does is pretty magical, actually, and never really gets enough recognition for it. So do you think there's a different approach that we should have with this? Because clearly there's lots of money being spent, but we haven't really got into the discussion from the network infra and data center fabric that will support it all.
Well, I was going to say that given that Metaverse itself and the monetization strategy of Metaverse is not well defined, it is difficult to say who's going to pay for what. However, the people who are benefiting from Metaverse depends on the use case, right? Mm-hmm. You talked about 3/4 of the use cases today is gaming and entertainment. What I heard Meta, Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg had said that they intend to have the Oculus Pro to become a PC, a personal computer replacement, where you will be working utilizing a virtual or a mixed reality device. Is it that far outreaching to say that is how you're going to be working in the future? I don't know. But if that is the case, would your employer be paying for that physical infrastructure to your house? Or would you be the one that's paying because you want to have a better experience to the entertainment that is coming to you? Right? So it depends on the use case and who it is that you are working for or supporting. So it could be the content provider that you are paying a subscription fee to. It could be your employer that's making sure that you have the ability to work remotely and effectively. Or it could be the infrastructure service provider that provides the service that you pay subscription to.
Yeah, I think it's both a consumer and a business opportunity. So everyone focuses in on gaming because everyone kind of understands gaming is very latency sensitive. People can understand that. But I think the opportunity from the business side is also massive as well. So Accenture purchased, I think it was 60,000 Oculus headsets for their new associates coming in. And their idea is to use the Metaverse and the Oculus headsets as a way of onboarding those new employees, which if you think of how we've all worked in COVID is almost a logical extension of that. So I think there's revenue to be made on the business side, and we shouldn't over-rotate and just focus on the consumer use cases, because the consumer use cases, we've got used to things just working. If you think through COVID, you're at home, yeah, Netflix worked, your Disney worked, your Teams worked, it all just worked. So finding an application that a consumer is actually willing to pay for is going to be difficult. So I think it's much more about the business opportunity is the one that can actually drive the investment in the infrastructure.
So when we look at the business opportunities, as far as I can see, we've got kind of three buckets. We've got, let's say, useful applications. So you've mentioned one. I think we've all seen the applications where, for example, in hospitals, in the US, for example, Magic Leap, they have an application where surgeons from different cities can get together and practice a brain operation using a hologram of the actual patient's brain. So they practice it before they actually get in to do the real thing. So that's one real. I know the military use this for training SWAT teams or Navy SEALs in different scenarios. Airline companies who, instead of flying people halfway around the world to learn how to maintain an engine of an Airbus or something, they're doing it in the VR world. Not to mention retailers who can, if you go and buy a new ski suit, then your avatar can put it on and go down the slope and you can see what you look like. So you've got those that are happening today. Yeah, so that part of the metaverse is there. Then we've got the kind of living in an arcade world, which is certainly not quite there. Horizon World, with all the money that was behind it, not a great success. And then on the far side, we've got what I call a bit of a silly world where people are buying expensive jewelry for their avatar, virtual jewelry for their avatar. It's a business opportunity, but the longevity of that, I don't know, it'll be fairly niche. So we're already into the metaverse with some real applications. So I guess the question, kind of going back or reacting to what you said, is those real applications people will pay for because there's real tangible value in today's world that you can quantify. Living in an arcade world and roaming around with people in a virtual Paris or Hawaii or whatever, that will be price sensitive because people are only going to pay so much for that, and then the far end will exist because it's one of those luxury things. So parts of the metaverse are here. The thing is, as it evolves and gets bigger, how will it scale up and how will everything come together at this point? So just taking a look at some of the questions here. We've got one question about blockchain technology. It says, how can blockchain technology upgrade telecoms ecosystem? Well, that's kind of broader than this particular subject, but any views on the role that blockchain will play in this? Or is it one of those de facto things that when you get into such a world where personal information, lifestyle information, etc., comes in, it's a given. And I think it's maybe not just blockchain, right? I think one of the basic platforms is security, yeah?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the challenges with the metaverse. If you think about, we already share an awful lot of personal data online, kind of unknowingly, whether it's through cookie tracking or whether you register for a website. So with the metaverse, you're potentially exposing even more of your own personal information. And I think that's one of the challenges for the infrastructure providers, so the compute providers, because at the moment they're very, very careful about their user data. It's very valuable for them. They can monetize that data. No one provider is going to be able to build out an edge compute platform globally, because it's going to take thousands and thousands of locations, and by the time you've built it, it's too late. So there needs to be some kind of shared compute infrastructure rolled out, but then it's how do you then firewall the data? How do you make sure that the metadata is not being monetized by Google, and kind of getting the platforms to be willing to work on a shared platform?
Well, to me, that blockchain has multiple use cases. First of all, Metaverse isn't necessarily one verse, right? Mm-hmm. It could be multiple verses. So there's got to be interoperability between all of them. And your identity is obviously super important to me and all of you guys. And with that said, that you may not want to have your identity be available in the metaverse. Therefore, blockchain, which is a ledger system that allows you to have distributed identity, but may not expose exactly all of your personal information. So you do want to know and have the ability to validate the people that are in the metaverses. But you also don't want to expose all of that privacy information. So blockchain is important from that perspective on the personal security and privacy front, but also on the ability to track any transactions, right? Financial transactions across the different metaverses. I don't know that if blockchain is the actual technology that will affect how everything works, because my anticipation with Metaverse is that there's going to be a lot of new technologies developed, implemented across the multiple verses into a future that we have not yet seen.
What you just said actually prompted a thought here, because in recent history, we've spoken a lot about each individual owning their own personal information and being able to monetize it, because today we don't. I mean, it's owned by Google, it's owned by Meta, it's owned by whoever. So do you think a part of this evolution could be, with all the money that's being spent on software and all the concerns about private information, that part of the puzzle could be each individual being enabled to control the kind of the marketing or the selling of their own personal information? What do you think, Mark? Possible?
I think that's going to be challenging, because we've all got used to just giving away the data. I mean, you register on a website. Do you really think about how much data you're just giving away and sharing for free? You have no control over what's happening to it. So there probably is an opportunity to monetize your persona in the metaverse, but it kind of goes against a lot of the business models that have supported building these things so far. So I think it's going to be challenging.
We have so little privacy today. So if you think that you actually have any real privacy and you didn't work for it, then you're mistaken. So, but is it valid to say that it is something that is valuable to us? Yes. We are trading conveniences for our privacy today. So if you are going to make a conscious decision on protecting your privacy, then you're going to be giving up a lot of conveniences. So it is definitely a totally separate topic that we could be discussing for days. And especially in the metaverse, because you potentially could have more than one persona. So depends on how you want to look at it.
It's very thought-provoking, that's for sure. Now, when you look at everything that's going to need to be processed, transmitted, the amount of bandwidth involved, the low latency, the extra compute power, at a time when we're seeking to consume less power and have sustainable technologies, this is kind of going the other way. So how do you think this is going to impact our technology, maybe design decisions? And I'm thinking here about the role of AI in kind of constantly calibrating the use of our compute and network fabric, because when you think of the quantity of data that's going to be flying around, it's enormous.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas where edge compute does have a big role to play, because the more data you can handle at the edge is less that's being transmitted over the network. But that infrastructure needs to be rolled out. It consumes power. So there's a generation of GPUs which we can use now. You might be able to support 10 users on those. It's how do you improve the software? How do you improve the compression algorithm so you can actually get more from that asset? And that's a challenge that needs to be worked on. Otherwise, this just won't scale, and no one can make the investment.
Yeah.
Well, it leads to another definition question, which is, what is edge, right? So everybody have a different definition of edge. In fact, if you look at what personal equipment for metaverse, potentially AR, VR usage, the edge is the device, because a lot of the compute happens in the device. But I'm sorry, have you seen the Oculus? Because it looks ridiculous when you put it on. And it's like, anyway.
So how ridiculous you look when you're using it as well.
I have some videos of my son I won't share. But what I am going to say is those devices are going to continue to improve. They do require space for compute and battery, right? So we were talking about this panel yesterday. Mark had these fancy glasses on, and I was like, that could be the new Oculus. But where are you going to put the compute? And if you don't have that in device, where would that go? Is this building that we're in today going to have a location somewhere inside this building that allows localized compute to happen? Who runs, manages, owns that space and all the equipment in there? Is that a business opportunity that doesn't exist today that somebody should be looking into investing in? And because it's coming, we know that Metaverse is going to be here. If it's not called Metaverse, it's going to be called something else, but it will be here, and it will require edge solutions, which we don't have today, and without which we can't make this AR, VR mixed reality work. So chicken and egg, which comes first, and who's going to invest?
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity there for the telcos to monetize. So you have a lot of tech real estate out there that's probably underutilized. You probably have some compute in there. Could you make use of the compute that's in there, or could you make use of the space that's in there for the deployment for these future edge platforms? That's where we've gone with this. So that's our belief is, when we look at the UK, we have a massive portfolio, and it's not been used. It's kind of sitting there, and it's right to be used for edge compute, the metaverse, a whole bunch of different uses.
So you got a new life for old colo facilities.
Well, yeah, I mean, the best data center you build is the one you don't have to build.
Right.
So it's just about, it's making use of real estate that's there, it's in the ground, it's been invested in, and it's just underutilized. So for the telcos, there's an opportunity there to monetize that estate.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, do you think we'll end up having a kind of two-speed or two-track metaverse where you've got the high end and the low end? I mean, that's kind of incompatible with the vision, but...
I hope not. Then it's failed. It should be about ubiquity of experience. But I think that does bring a massive challenge. And I would hate to see kind of a high-class and low-class version of the metaverse. Then for me, it's just failed.
I'm not sure that it would work that way, right? Because everybody wants to have a similar experience, but who's to say that there isn't one for work and one for entertainment and one for education? I mean, those are all different potential use cases, and maybe they don't all exist in the same metaverse, right? But what I would say is, just to go back to an earlier topic, when you're investing on the edge, what do you invest in? Because the technologies continue to evolve quickly. If you were to put compute on the edge today, is that enough 2 years from now? Or is that all your investment that you've made totally obsolete 3 years from now? Is it consuming too much power? Because power is going to become the scarce resource, right? So maybe compute isn't the challenge, power is. And so what is it that you're putting on the edge that's helping with the need of making sure that a whole new set of technologies and way of living that's going to work for us?
Yeah, and there's no point deploying edge compute if we don't re-engineer the network. And you're kind of stuck in this chicken and egg. So who's going to blink first? Is it the guy that rolls out the compute, or is it the guy that needs to re-engineer his network?
That's a killer question. We've got a question here from Anonymous. Decentraland has a $2 billion valuation with around 50 users online during one day last week. When will the metaverse become a commercial reality? Okay, I've got an idea on that, but you're the panelists.
I think that there is no one metaverse. It's a multiverse of metaverses.
Right.
So people talk about the metaverse, but it's not just one thing. It will be. There could be a metaverse. There could be.
Well, there are lots of worlds in. If you think of the metaverse as one thing, there are lots of worlds that will be in it, right?
Well, that's a really difficult question. I don't think that any of us is equipped to provide that data or answer. But
I just wish I had shares in Decentraland.
I have to say, I've never heard of Decentraland.
I've never heard of Decentraland.
But what I would say is whoever that is going to own the infrastructure that supports the metaverse would have potentially the ability to replace all of the edge computing capabilities for most of the application service providers and many of the other business lines and industries that are in line today. If you are the infrastructure owner as well as the resource owner on the edge, then what's the CDN? Why would we need them?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's just a simple example. There are so many others that could fade away.
Yeah, so very, very existential question. So one last question that requires a one-word answer. So the impact on our industry, so networks, data centers, metaverse-related items going to have an impact sooner, meaning in the next 3 years, or later after that?
I don't know.
Have a punt, Mark.
I'll just say the last mile.
The last mile. Okay. I'm going to go for later, but then it'll hit pretty hard. So anyway, lots of thought-provoking comments there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a great conference, everybody.
Cheers, speakers. Thank you ever so much there for a really insightful panel there. As you guys walk off to the stage, and on to the next panel coming up. We just want to say thank you to all of our event sponsors here this year at Capacity Year 2022, and also this session which is in association with the ITW Global Leaders Forum. So the session that we've got coming up is a keynote panel, Architecting the Network of the Future. And the speakers that we've got here are Emmanuel Rocas,